Hi, my name's Greg Mayo. I'm the author of Almost Daddy, and today we're going to talk about men healing from abortion. To do that, we're going to look at 3 father wounds, and we'll take a look at what they are, how they impact our lives, and possibly our abortion story. And we'll also talk about what healing might look like. But first, I want to tell you a story. See, in the second semester of my senior year, I had plans, and I had promise. I was the editor of the school newspaper. I was a capable midfielder, first chair trombone and jazz band. I had plans to attend college, to write, and to play soccer. But on a chilly April morning, all that was slipping away, and I wasn't even aware of it. See, on this particular morning, I was sitting on the steps of an abortion clinic. My girlfriend and her mother were inside, and I was powerless and confused. I couldn't stop it. I had no legal say, and I really had no idea how to sort it all out. Looking out of the parking lot, I saw signs that said things like, baby killer and burn in hell, you know the drill. So on one side, I was told it's no big deal, just a clump of cells. But then on the other side, I was told I'm going to burn in hell. This was a tough time, but it was also a hinge point that would send me down paths I wouldn't become aware of for decades. Almost Daddy, it is a novel, and as such, it's fiction. And I wrote it because I wanted to show in a very real way how some men experience life after an abortion. And it has bits and pieces of my story. And like Ben, the main character in the book, I developed post-abortion stress syndrome, PASS, then, but I wouldn't be able to put a name on it until about 10 or 12 years ago. Some of the symptoms of PASS are anger and rage, anxiety and worry, feeling like a failure or fear of failure, low self-esteem, helplessness, suicidal thoughts, depression, self-loathing, and toxic shame. Toxic shame we understand as different from healthy shame. Healthy shame says, I did bad. Toxic shame says, I am bad. Some of the acting out behaviors that go along with it are attention deficit, isolation, avoidance, alcohol, drug abuse, displaced aggression, problems with commitment, serial sexual relationships, and changed views on God. I started experiencing some of the above immediately, but I didn't know that's what was happening. But anyway, to sort out what happens next, we have to take a few steps back and see how I got to those concrete steps in the first place. Up until I was about 6 years old, I lived with my mom and my dad and my older brother. My dad and I had a connection. I wanted to do whatever Dad was doing, and he understood me. I was smart and quirky and kind of funny and weird, and Dad encouraged all of that. But Dad was also an alcoholic. He had his own father wounds from an abusive alcoholic father and also from the after effects of serving in the Vietnam War. So at around 6, my parents divorced. Dad had been sober a little over a year at that point, but too much had transpired when he was drinking for he and Mom to feel like they could go forward together. And so I really didn't see much of my dad until he divorced his second wife about 7 or 8 years later. That is the first father wound, and the word is abandonment. Now, in the middle of that, my mom was remarried, and at first it was amazing. My stepdad was there. He played games with us, he taught us how to play basketball, and he just did dad stuff. It's also where I got my work ethic, by the way. But when I was around 12, my stepdad lost his business and he turned to drinking. At first, he grew more and more verbally abusive, and then it turned physical. My mom didn't know. In fact, I told no one for years. And when I was 14, Mom and my stepdad divorced, but the damage had already been done. And that's the second father wound, and the word is abuse. Now, from as early as I can remember, until I was 14, my brother and I went to my grandma's church. I think of the quote from Gandhi who said, I like your Christ, I do not like your Christians. Your Christians are so unlike your Christ. See, every Sunday I found out a new reason I was going to burn in hell. Now, Psalm 68:5 says, Father to the fatherless, this is God. And 1 Peter 5:7 tells us, give all of your worries and cares to God, for he cares about you. Man, that's a God I needed, but that's not the God I knew. And so the third father wound, based on a lie that I was fed every Sunday about who God was and how he felt about me. And the word is rejection. Now, it's important to note here that a father wound is also created by an emotionally absent father, a workaholic dad who lives there but isn't really there, or a dad who passes on his own misguided understanding of masculinity. The dad, the win, be tough, sort of macho, think you sports, right? Now, look, I've talked to men over the years, and they have very similar stories on one level or another. There's abandonment, there's abuse, there's wrong views on God. In the book Wild at Heart, John Eldredge writes, in a young boy's development, there comes a crucial time when the father must intervene. It arrives early in adolescence, somewhere between the ages of 11 and 15. And if that intervention does not take place, the boy is set up for disaster. Now, when I was in that age window, I had been abandoned by my dad, verbally and physically abused by my stepdad, and, at least in my mind, rejected by God. And so I rolled into high school with no clear understanding of masculinity and a wounded soul. I think for men with a father wound, this is pretty common. We have no one deliberately showing us the path of authentic masculinity. So we try to look like a man or act like a man, but we really have no idea if we're doing it right. Many of us look to actors or musicians or sports stars. For me, I looked to Magnum P.I. and John Bon Jovi. Unfortunately, I took Magnum's mustache and put it with Bon Jovi's hair. But my point is, I watched the Magnum episodes, and each episode he had a dilemma to deal with. And he always did the right thing. And he fought, and he drank fine whiskey, and he drove a red Ferrari, right? And he always got the girl. But see, that wasn't authentic masculinity. It was just a character on a TV show. By the way, in Wild at Heart, John Eldredge goes on to say that the next window that opens in a boy's soul is sexuality. As a teenager, I began looking for a relationship that would define me. See, if I found someone that thought I was okay, then I was. But when they left, unfortunately, my identity left with them. My senior year, I found my first long-term romantic relationship, and that circles us back to the concrete steps that April morning. So you can see, by the time I found myself on those steps of that clinic, there was already a lot going on. There was a lot of unresolved issues, a lot of pain, and a lot of anger. So now we're a few months past the abortion and past my high school graduation. I was depressed and confused and had already started exhibiting post-abortion stress syndrome issues, PASS, right? Remember the list from before? I think that summer I had 7 or 8 jobs alone. But the thing is, no one was talking about post-abortion mental health in 1988, and especially not for men. My father, a recovering alcoholic, saw that something was wrong with me, and he decided I was on something. So he and my mom put me in a rehab place for adolescents with drug and alcohol problems. But here's the thing. I rarely drank, and I never did drugs of any kind. But they kept me anyway. My blood and my urine test came back negative. There was nothing in me, but they kept me anyway. And so here I am confused, depressed, struggling with anxiety, and now I'm watching kids actually detox from drugs and hard alcohol. And my anxiety went through the roof, and I spent the next few weeks surrounded by people that I couldn't relate to. See, I didn't have their problems, and I was sure none of them had mine, though looking back, I'm sure some of them did. But like me, they didn't talk about it. Though needless to say, by the time I turned 19, I was pretty off balance. I moved around the country a lot for the next several years. It was kind of a blur of different jobs and places and people. But at that time, I also started reading a lot. I was looking for some kind of spiritual or philosophical system that would make sense to me, because remember, God didn't want me. At 22, I was working construction in west central Nebraska. I received a phone call from a girl in Chicago that I dated before I left. She told me she was pregnant, told me she was going to have an abortion. And I fought and argued and I cried and I begged on the phone that night, but at the end of the day, she went through with it and there was nothing I could do. The last thing I said to her on the phone was, "Please don't kill my baby." She said, "My choice is made and you can't stop it." Poet and essayist Charles Bukowski once wrote, "We don't even ask for happiness, just a little less pain." Back then I thought I was alone. Maybe you do too. But I know today that I wasn't, and neither are you. Look, according to DoSomething.org, 1 in 7 boys will experience physical abuse before they reach manhood. 1 in 5, sexual abuse, and roughly 1 in 4 men in America will have lost a child to abortion by the time they turn 45. So you can see the need for healing is great, and it has to start with the church. Not protests, not condemnations, not fire from the pulpit, right? but rather the healing and the redemptive power of the gospel. C.F.W. Walther said, if the teachings of Christ were a law, it would not be a gospel, which means glad tiding, but a sad tiding. Glad tidings is about healing. It's about grace. It's about redemption, and it's about forgiveness. Many with father wounds already have a wrong image of God. We see God as angry and displeased with us. We're told by many pro-life groups that God wants to punish us, that we're evil and unredeemable. And many times, because of unresolved issues from our past, we believe them. And then well-meaning church groups set up breakfast or book studies or Bible groups, and they wonder why they're poorly attended. Well, it's because we make them function the way that women think and feel and share. And there's nothing wrong with the way women think, feel, and share. It's just not the way men do it. Men don't want that kind of structure. They crave adventure and experience. And maybe more than anything, men crave authenticity. Benjamin Disraeli said, man is never so manly as when he feels deeply, acts boldly, and expresses himself with frankness and with fervor. To me, the above perfectly describes Jesus, but it's not often the Jesus that we're taught. Jesus cried in public, but he also cursed a fig tree. He felt deeply, and we can see the woman at the well whom he had compassion for, or the crippled man who he healed on the Sabbath. But he also acted boldly, like when he turned over the tables in the temple and chased out the money changers. And he expressed himself directly and honestly. And we see that with dozens of interactions in the gospel. So if we're trying to reach hurting men, why are we not appealing to their authentic masculinity by using the perfect example of masculinity? Look what Christ did. He chose 12 guys to start his church. Not scholars or educated men, by the way. He didn't ask them to sing songs together or to pray aloud. His process, his example, involved action, not sitting in a circle in a room somewhere. It's been said that women bond face-to-face and men side-by-side. So activities like hunting or fishing, service projects, working on cars, or just being in the woods, that's where men bond and feel free to share. Understand, many men who have lost fatherhood to abortion see what's happening in their lives a bit differently. They have problems with their careers or their marriage or their existing children, and the assumption is often made that they're being punished for the abortion. So they won't willingly come to a group or a church meeting. There's just too much pain, and there's too much toxic shame. There's a quote from the movie The Patriot where Mel Gibson's character says, "I have long feared that my sins would come back to haunt me, and that the cost would be more than I can bear." That's not the truth. But before recovery, many of us believed it. For me, by the time I was in my late 30s, I had spent half of my life around the self-help movement, ACOA, Codependence Anonymous, etc. I'd read dozens and dozens of books. I'd been to therapy. I'd been to group meetings. And yet I never connected the dots between the issues I was experiencing and my abortion wound. So when I found abortion recovery, I was close to 40, and it was the most revolutionary idea ever. But there were no groups near me in the Indy area, so I read books. I met with my pastor, and I worked through the books. I also saw a therapist. But it was frustrating because resources were very scarce, and they were mostly written by women. And as we've already discussed, it ain't the same. So after writing Almost Daddy, the Forgotten Story, my wife encouraged me to write Almost Daddy, A Men's Guide to Healing After Abortion. In fact, the more people that read the novel, the more people encouraged me to write a recovery guide. It would seem that my years of self-help work and years as a leader for 12-step groups like Celebrate Recovery had collided with this idea of a 12-step guide for post-abortion. So I wrote it. And it's been out a few months now. But understand, it is merely a tool. It's a piece of the puzzle. It is not meant to be the be-all, end-all of a recovery journey. But it is meant to provide some help and direction as you make your way down your own path to recovery. The 12 steps, in short, if you're not familiar with them, number 1 is I can't. Number 2, God can. Number 3, let God. Number 4, look within. 5 is admit your wrongs. 6 is prepare for change. 7, seek God's help. 8, become willing. 9, make amends. 10, daily inventory. 11, pray and meditate. And 12, give it away. Now, in this guide, we look at abortion recovery through the lens of these steps. We share testimony at the end of each chapter. But most importantly, we invite men to walk the path with us. That last step, by the way, is not only the key to your peace, but also to reaching men. It reads in full, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we try to carry this message to others and to practice these principles in all our affairs. See, a man will respond to an authentic man who shares openly and has been through the battle himself. I've seen it dozens of times. It's like a spoon. It just works. And we have to meet men where they are, in their pain, in their wound, and then show them how we've been healed. And so you do the hard work on yourself, and then you share what you've learned with others. Look, this is a boots on the ground, shoulder to shoulder, waist deep in the muck and the mud kind of ministry. You simply cannot lead men on this kind of journey from a perch on top of a hill somewhere. You have to do it shoulder to shoulder. The simple truth, the message that we have to carry to men, is that God loves, God heals, God forgives, and that God is a good father. Many men today ended up at the abortion crossroads already broken and confused. My story shows that truth. And so we must treat the whole man. And to do that, we must reach him where he's at. In 1 Corinthians 9:22, Paul says, when I am with those who are weak, I share their weakness, for I want to bring the weak to Christ. Yes, I try to find common ground with everyone, doing everything I can to save some. So my challenge to you today is in 3 parts. Number 1, work your own recovery. Number 2, meet men where they're at. And number 3, help them find their healing path. I wrote Almost Daddy because I wanted to show the effects of abortion on some men in a very real way, in an authentic way. It was meant to be an invitation to walk down the path with me and with other men who have father wounds and have lost fatherhood to abortion. That's it, because it's a story, and story matters, and your story matters. I want to leave you with a final thought today via a quote from Richard Bach. He said, the meaning I picked, the one that changed my life, overcome fear, and behold wonder. When a man gets to a place where he can overcome and let go of fear, he will find the boy inside and behold wonder. And it is in that place of wonder that he will find God the Father. That's all I have to share today, folks. Thank you for attending the session. Again, my name's Greg Mayo.